Hey guys, and welcome to this week's true crime case. Today I'm going to talk about the bizarre disappearances of the Palmer brothers. The case of Michael remains unsolved, but the case of Chucky has been closed and he has been declared deceased. The circumstances of these cases really are unsettling because it's as if the Palmer brothers disappeared without a trace. And even though they disappeared in similar ways, they disappeared 11 years apart. The Palmer brothers consisted of several kids, but for the purpose of this video, I'm only going to talk about the boys. Chris is the oldest brother. Charles, who also went by Chucky, was the middle brother. And Michael, who also went by Mike, was the youngest brother. The kids grew up in Wasilla, Nebraska, and really enjoyed spending time together and doing different things like hiking, fishing, and hunting. But on June 3rd of 1999, things really changed for the family. Michael was 15 years old when he disappeared. He was riding a bike down a road on June 4th, 1999. He had spent the night at a friend's house, and him and 3 other boys decided to go to a graduation party near the Meadow Lake subdivision, which was just a few miles outside of Wasilla, Nebraska. They also went to some other parties that night, and it was stated that Michael was in a fight at one of those parties. According to the boys he was with that night, after they left the graduation party, which was 9 miles from where Michael was supposed to stay the night, they decided to ride their bikes back to the house. Even though Michael and his other friends that he was with that night did have a few beers, the boys in the group stated that none of them were intoxicated when the boys left the party around 4 a.m. The boys began their bike ride back, but eventually they realized that Mike had fallen behind, so they stopped at the 7-Eleven on Parks Highway to wait for him to catch up. But when Mike never showed up, the boys just assumed that he had rode his bike back to his own house. In the morning, when his mother called the boys told her that Mike was not there, so she ended up reporting her son missing around 3 p.m. Michael was never seen again, but the bike he was riding that night was believed to be found in the Little Susitna River, which was a detail that was later disputed by his older brother Chris, as he didn't believe that the bike found in the river was the bike that Mike was riding that night. His shoes were also later found 200 yards away from the river next to a private airstrip. They were wet and placed in a neat manner. There was an extensive search done in the woods near the river, but there has never been any further trace of Michael and what may have happened to him that night, but rumors may hold a key piece to the puzzle. The father hired 2 private investigators. The first one was forced to move away after she had received threats against her life, and the other investigator uncovered rumors suggesting Michael never left the party and was either killed or kidnapped from the party, but the rumor was never substantiated. And months later, a local boy came forward and claimed he saw someone beat Michael up and then shoot him on a bridge, but when he was later questioned by authorities, he claimed to have made up the story. Some people do think that Michael may have fallen into the river and died of hypothermia, but tracker dogs were used and they never found a trace of his scent leading to the river, and there was no sign of his body. And since the river was so small, they didn't believe that if his body was in the water that it would have gone somewhere. They believed that his body would have stayed in the local vicinity. The disappearance of Michael remains unsolved and is considered to be open. Nearly 11 years later, Charles, also known as Chucky, was 30 years old when he went missing under similar circumstances. On April 10th, 2010, Chucky went missing while snowmobiling with his older brother and stepfather and some other friends near Talkeetna, Alaska, where they planned on spending a few days riding snowmobiles in the mountains. On the morning of April 10th, the handlebar snapped off Chris's snowmobile, and he wasn't able to go snowmobiling with the rest of the group, so he ended up staying back at the cabin. But it is important to note that he was the more experienced snowmobiler, unlike Chucky, who wasn't as experienced. Chucky had gone snowmobiling with the rest of the group while Chris stayed back at the cabin, and according to the rest of the group, everything went well while they were on the main trail until they started heading back towards the cabin. Around 7:15 p.m., Chucky became separated from the group and ultimately vanished without a trace. But according to the other group members, they saw Chucky riding his snowmobile in the opposite direction of the cabin. And although he was dressed for the cold weather, he didn't have a GPS, food, or water. He was reported missing the next morning when he never showed up back at the cabin, but there had been a snowstorm that night, which hindered the search party, as Nebraska got 28 inches of snow in that area since the search had started. His snowmobile was found 12 miles from the cabin on a side trail. The state troopers believed he may have gone off on a side trail and got stuck in the snow, but oddly enough, there was never any footprints found near the snowmobile, and his helmet was never found either. Although there was a snowstorm, it seemed very unlikely that the snow would cover the tracks that would have been made by Chucky if he had gotten off his snowmobile. But since the snowmobile was there and he wasn't, there really is no other explanation for the lack of footprints. And according to the group, they didn't realize he had fallen behind until they noticed him riding in the opposite direction, but it is unclear why they did not follow him. But his older brother Chris does believe that when he couldn't keep up with the rest of the group, he became disoriented. The state troopers did perform another search once all of the snow had melted, but once again they didn't find anything, and there was never any evidence found to suggest what happened to Chucky. His body was also never found, but although this case does remain unsolved, he has been declared deceased due to exposure. The fact that these two brothers disappeared in similar circumstances almost a decade apart is strange in itself, but neither of their cases have ever been solved. But I do believe that there is definitely more to the disappearance of Michael. He could have been assaulted at the party, as rumors suggested, and maybe something more happened to him there, which could explain why his friends never went back to look for him. And his bike and shoes could have been hidden in those exact places to throw the investigators off their trail. But another thing to note, and I find this very odd, is that Michael's shoes were placed neatly where they were found, which suggests that they were put there on purpose and not just thrown there casually. They were also wet, but if someone put his bike in the river, they could have dropped the shoes and then placed them at the airstrip, or it could suggest maybe they originally put them in the water and changed their mind to make like a path as if he were walking in that direction somewhere. But if that was the case, why would he take his shoes off? And no other clothing items had been found, only his shoes and the bike that he was assumed to be riding that night, which is also important to note that the bike he was riding that night was not his own. He was borrowing that bike. It was also stated that he was involved in a fight that night at one of the parties, which it's not too much of a stretch that something happened to him there and someone tried to cover it up. The investigator could have been threatened to get away from the case if maybe she was getting too close to the truth, and the other investigator uncovered rumors that Michael had been involved in a fight and something happened to him at the party, which could further verify this theory. But I definitely believe that something happened to Michael that night. As for Chucky, I am unsure why the group members would not follow him after they realized he was traveling in the wrong direction, especially knowing he was not an experienced snowmobiler. But this is actually a similar detail from both of the cases, and I just find it very odd why once you realize someone in your group has, fallen behind or gone missing, why you would not go search for them right then and there. I just think that's extremely odd. And I also found it strange that he was riding in the opposite direction, but it could be because he did get disoriented when he couldn't keep up, as the older brother Chris had mentioned. But the part that baffles me the most is why there were never any footprints found near his snowmobile or snowmobile tracks after it was found. But as for the helmet not being found, he could have kept it on after he left the snowmobile, but there still should have been some type of trace evidence of him, maybe a glove or something. But because his snowmobile was found 12 miles from the cabin, it could be possible that he simply got stuck on the side trail and left the snowmobile to go find the main trail or the cabin, but got lost. Maybe the footprints were covered up by the snowstorm, because there was already snow on the ground, which I believe would show his footprints. But once the snowstorm hit, all that extra snow was piled onto the snow that was already on the ground. And the second search didn't occur until after all of the snow had been melted. And when they went back, they didn't find anything during their second search, but it could be that the footprints were covered up by the snowstorm. In my opinion, I believe that Chucky simply left his snowmobile to go find the trail or go find the cabin, and maybe he got hurt, or maybe he got lost and just couldn't find his way back. It really is unnerving that these two brothers disappeared without a trace and were never seen again, despite the fact that they were both in a group at the time of their disappearances. I honestly couldn't imagine how the family is dealing with both of these tragedies. Losing one son will be hard enough, not knowing where they are or what happened to them, but to lose another son years later just to go through the same thing is unbelievable and heartbreaking. But that's it for this video. I want to know what you guys think. Were their disappearances connected in some way, or was this a coincidence? Do you have any other theories as to what may have happened to the Palmer brothers? Let me know in the comments section, and I'll see you guys in the next one.